Alrighty, we'll pick it up on session 26, page 181 of your workbook. So let's do just a fast review, and it will be fast because last week we devoted the entire hour to part 3 of the DVD set, Israel, a Nation is Born, 1956 to 1967, through the eyes of Foreign Minister Abba Eban. A very unique perspective on the nation Israel, since he made such a huge commitment to the government of Israel during his lifetime. So that was our class last week. So now that brings us to page 181, 1967, the Six-Day War. So everybody get there? Everybody there? Alrighty. So Israel had about 11 years of peace and growth, we saw last week. And we pick it up at the top of the page. However, if Israel's growth and strength were increasingly a fact of Middle Eastern life, so by the same token was Arab hatred. By 1965, the Syrian regime had allowed its 47-mile frontier with Israel to become the Middle East's single most explosive boundary. And the next sentence talks about an example of this escalation. An example of this escalation occurred when Israel began to embark on its own regional water plan. Remember, we talked about the water plan and the water carrier that went from north to south. So when Israel began to embark on its water plan, Syria was incensed. Foreign ministers of 11 Arab governments met in Cairo in December 1963, and they reached agreement on their response. They would divert the tributaries, I think your notebook says so, it should say to. They would divert the tributaries to the Jordan River, essentially the Chazbani River and the Banyas River, that arose on the Arab side of the line. In that fashion, they would prevent the waters from reaching Israeli territory, reaching the Sea of Galilee, especially with the Banyas. At the end of February, to that end, in February 1964, Syrian and Lebanese engineering teams began the construction of diversion canals several miles within their own borders. They didn't get very far with that plan. Israeli artillery promptly shelled and destroyed their bulldozers. The operation resumed in summer of 1965. It was bombed and strafed by Israeli planes. By then, the Syrians had completed only about 1% of the necessary diversion. So they got the message. They got the message, we are not going to allow you to do that, no matter what. Even more incendiary in the Israeli-Syrian relations was the acute state of tension along the demilitarized zones. Nowhere were Israeli citizens more vulnerable to attack. Along the main DMZ area, Syrian gun positions on the Golan Heights dominated the Hula Valley. Now here's what we're talking about. Here's a satellite view of Israel. Here is Israel, of course. You recognize the Sea of Galilee, I think, a very prominent landmark. There's Lebanon to the north, and Syria to the east, and the Golan Heights is this area right here between the orange borders. And the Hula Valley is parallel to the Golan Heights in the finger of Israel that protrudes up into Lebanon. So there's the Hula Valley. Let's go in for a close-up. Here you can see the Hula Valley in the red circle. And if you look closely, I'm sure you can see the farmland there. Very well-watered, heavy agricultural area. Now the DMZ that we're talking about right now, this is the original DMZ that was formed during the War of Independence. And this is what they're talking about. This DMZ was at the bottom of the Golan Heights and right along the edge of the Hula Valley. So that's the area we're talking about. Here is the Hula Valley. Today you can see it's very fertile, very well watered, lots of agriculture going on there. It's really a valuable piece of land. We are in the Hula Valley now looking to the east at the Golan Heights. You can see how they dominate the area, and the Syrian gun emplacements are located on the horizon there at the top of the Golan Heights, and they can easily fire into the Hula Valley. So again, a very pretty area of Israel. Now, I'm up on the Golan Heights. Picture was taken in 1965, 1966, and we're at a Syrian bunker. This Syrian bunker was not destroyed, and it's available for tourists. A lot of people go up on the Golan and visit this bunker. It's kind of a war memorial now. One of our fellow students there is taking a picture of the Hula Valley. I decided I'd go inside the bunker and shoot a picture from the windows protruding, looking out over the Hula Valley. And so this is the picture out of the bunker's window. Now the mountains in the distance are Lebanon. That's the nation of Lebanon. The Hula Valley is the valley in the center of the picture. And then in the foreground is the Golan Heights coming up to the bunker. So you can see if your gun emplacement is located where this bunker is located, you can shoot just about anywhere you want in the Hula Valley. So the Syrians had quite an advantage being located on the high ground. Very difficult to stop this. When was the bunker built? Well, all I can say is prior to 67. Okay. You know, I don't know exactly when that particular bunker was built, but it's up there in the 60s. All right, so firing from the Golan became so persistent that the Israeli used armored tractors as standard equipment. The confrontation along the Israeli-Syrian frontier was escalating into prolonged artillery duels and even aerial dogfights. And we saw that in the video last week, as the video ended during this period of time. In an anti-Israel campaign, the Syrian government was determined as well to make use of the Palestine refugees. But actually, the decision had been made as early as the Arab Summit meeting of January 1964, when the Palestinians were formally authorized to, quote, carry out their role of liberating their homeland and determining their destiny. Several months later, an assembly of Palestine Arabs was convened in Hashemite Jerusalem. By Hashemite Jerusalem, what we mean there is the Jordanian side of Jerusalem. Remember, this was Jordan at this time. So the Jordanian side of Jerusalem, the government is the kingdom of Jordan is ruled by the Hashemite tribe, the Hashemite Arab tribe. That's why it's called Hashemite Jerusalem. Now, from its proceedings emerged the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO that we're so familiar with. A rival and even more radical Palestinian group in Syria, the Fatah, the Arab Liberation Movement, had been organized several years earlier by veterans of the Mufti's former Arab Higher Committee. And here is the flag or the logo of Fatah. And of course it very clearly talks about or highlights, violence against Israel. So that's the flag of Fatah. Now, even as Syrian troops ensconced on the Golan shelled and mortared Israeli farm settlements on the Hula Valley floor, Fatah guerrillas were laying repeated ambushes for Israeli army patrols and inflicting numerous casualties. So page 182. So this is the preamble to the Six-Day War. In 1966, Nasser signed a new defense pact with the Soviet Union. Under its terms, the Russians were extended naval facilities in the Mediterranean ports of Mersa Matruh and Sidi Barrani, at the Red Sea port of Qasir, at 3 Red Sea fishing villages. 3 airports were placed at the Soviets' disposal. In return, Moscow undertook to increase its shipments of arms and technicians. Again, we saw that in the video last week. The question was asked, why does Egypt need all these arms? Who are they going to use them against, you know? In April 1967, there could be little question that the deteriorating border situation with Syria was electric with danger. Fatah infiltration raiders were crossing over in greater frequency, each time accompanied by larger numbers of Syrian regular army troops. On May 11th, Jerusalem notified the Security Council that unless Syrian provocations ended, the Israeli government regarded itself as fully entitled to act in self-defense. Sounds like today, doesn't it? Has anything changed?
That was the UN Security Council.
Yes, that's the UN Security Council. Maybe better known as the UN Insecurity Council. At that point, deeply alarmed for the security of their favored Arab protege, the Russians took their most calamitous misstep. Their most calamitous misstep since the beginning of their intrusion into the Near East. On May 12, Dmitry Poyedyev, the Soviet ambassador to Cairo, wired Moscow this message. He said, "Today we have passed on to the Egyptian authorities information concerning the massing of Israeli troops on the northern frontier for a surprise attack on Syria." That report that they sent to Cairo was entirely false, totally made up. Nasser, in turn, agreed to dispatch a series of military missions to Syria. Upon being taken to the southern frontier with Israel, the Egyptian visitors were less than impressed by the evidence they found of Israeli concentrations. There was none. You know, this was all false. There were no Israeli troops there massing against Syria. So Nasser's decision to let the crisis escalate was based rather on other factors. On May 15th, Cairo announced a state of military emergency and sent 2 armored divisions moving ostentatiously through the boulevards of Cairo and then crossing into the Suez Canal. Remember that on the DVD? We saw movies of that on the DVD last week. Then on the night of May 16th, Nasser suddenly gave orders for the 3,400 UNEF force near Gaza to redeploy in encampments within the Strip itself. Now the UN would not accept any half measures. Either the UNEF accomplished its mission without reservation, or it would be withdrawn altogether from Egypt. Unwittingly, the UN Secretary General U Thant had just dislodged the stone that loosed the avalanche. And here is the UN Secretary General at that time. Unwittingly, he played a major part in the Six-Day War. For on the afternoon of May 17th, after a series of lengthy cabinet meetings, the Egyptian government called the Secretary General's hand. He called his bluff. It notified him that it was ordering a complete UNEF evacuation from Egyptian territory and from the Gaza Strip. You want all or nothing? All right, we want nothing. Get out of there. That was Nasser's response. Now, this flew in the face of the fact that the General Assembly resolution of November 4th, 1956 meant that the UNEF could not be withdrawn without the consent of the General Assembly. This understanding had been verified in February of 1957 by a previous Secretary General, Dag Hammarskjöld, following a lengthy personal conference with Nasser. On May 18th, 1967, U Thant met urgently with delegates of the 7 countries whose troops served on the United Nations forces. It was then that the Secretary General learned, to his dismay, that these representatives, following the lead of India and Yugoslavia, were determined to recall their soldiers at any cost, under no circumstances would their governments risk the lives of their troops in the Middle East. So the UNEF was a total facade. There was nothing behind it. Nothing behind this peacekeeping force. Page 183. Persuaded that further discussions would be useless, U Thant henceforth remained oblivious to appeals from the United States and Israel not to capitulate to Nasser's demands. Late that day, the blue-helmeted UNEF garrisons evacuated their positions at Al-Kuntila and Jebel Al-Hamra. And again, we saw that on the video last week as well. Egyptian troops and heavy equipment immediately moved in. Then, more alarming yet, an Egyptian task force suddenly ordered the evacuation of the tiny UNEF company at Sharm el-Sheikh, guarding the Strait of Tiran. So as a result of U Thant's unwillingness to invoke the full range of United Nations procedure, the UNEF collapsed like a house of cards, which it was. And with it collapsed the world's most impressive peacekeeping achievement. As long as there was peace, will be there. But to enforce any resolutions, no way, no way. 3 Egyptian divisions and more than 600 tanks began fanning out through the Sinai Peninsula. At the same time, the Damascus regime, of course that's Syria, the Damascus regime mobilized 50 cadet battalions, and Iraqi brigades began moving toward the frontier with Jordan. The governments of Kuwait, Yemen, and Algeria announced their readiness to dispatch troops and planes to Syria and Egypt. As it developed, the afternoon of May 17th was the turning point of the Middle Eastern crisis. Until then, retreat without loss of face might still have been possible for Nasser. You know, the Arab pride and hatred of humiliation. Having satisfied himself with a show of strength, the Egyptian president then could have ordered his divisions back to Cairo, leaving the impression they had forestalled a Zionist attack. But his government's response to Uthant and the latter's instant capitulation signified the point of no return. To his own astonishment, Nasser had won a brilliant victory scarcely by raising his little finger, just with a threat. Just with a threat. Once again, he was on the threshold of becoming the unchallenged leader of the Arab world. Now he would have to act the part. On May 19th, Egyptian units were reinforcing their former garrisons at Sharm el-Sheikh, while in Gaza, Ahmed Zukairi's Palestine army, consisting mainly of refugees, was preparing to occupy the border encampments that had been, until then, manned by the UNEF. On May 20th, a general Israeli mobilization was proclaimed. Late on the night of May 21st, acceding to the request of his cabinet and of other Arab governments, Nasser made a fateful decision. At daybreak, 2 Egyptian submarines, a destroyer, 4 missile launcher boats passed through the Suez Canal, headed for the Red Sea. And the next day, Nasser made the chilling announcement: "The Strait of Tiran is part of our territorial waters. No Israeli ship will ever navigate it again. We also forbid the shipment of strategic material to Israel on non-Israeli vessels." 1956 all over again, right? Blockading the Strait of Tiran, page 184. The threat to Israel was mortal. This is not some casual event. Eilat was Israel's key oil port. By noon of May 23rd, mobilization in Israel had become total. On May 23rd, after Nasser closed the strait, General Rabin, he's the chief of staff, General Rabin was overcome with despair at the government's indecision, and he suffered a nervous breakdown. And of course, you have a picture there of the young Yitzhak Rabin when he was serving as a general in the IDF. He was at the point of no return here. The Army medical officer prescribed rest for 2 or 3 days until the chief of staff recovered from his collapse, which was officially attributed to nicotine poisoning. He smoked too much, so it overcame him. And the real reason was his despair at the government's indecision. The effect: the nation and its armed forces were bereft of decisive leadership at one of the gravest moments, perhaps the very gravest, of Israel's existence. At this point, there was a growing clamor for Moshe Dayan to become the Minister of Defense. And on June 1st, Israel's Prime Minister Levi Eshkol gave the Defense Ministry to Dayan. So popular trust in the famed one-eyed general was overwhelming. News of his appointment immediately restored the confidence of the armed forces and the nation at large. Euphoric at the received adulation of the Arabic world, Nasser addressed the Egyptian parliament on May 25th. The problem presently before the Arab countries is not whether the port of Eilat should be blockaded or how to blockade it, but how to totally exterminate the state of Israel for all time. Has anything changed? No. Yeah, you're right. You all get an A. On May 30th, Hussein of Jordan, this is King Hussein of Jordan, the Hashemite ruler of Jordan. Hussein of Jordan flew to Cairo to sign a mutual defense pact with Egypt, treating photographers to the spectacle of himself and Nasser embracing in brotherly friendship. They were not good buddies up to that point. The little Hashemite monarch, I call him little there because he was about my size, you know. He was a little guy. The little Hashemite monarch clearly dared not abstain from an undertaking that was sweeping the entire Arab world into its vortex, and that seemed likely, at last, to annihilate the Zionist enemy. On June 3rd, Iraq also joined the military pact. Notice, this is a military agreement. They're entering into a covenant. And the following night, an Iraqi motorized brigade, crossed into Jordan, moving from Iraq across Jordan, heading for Israel. At the same time, the Iraqi Air Force concentrated its planes at the Habanya Air Base near the Jordanian frontier. Now, when Yitzhak Rabin became Chief of Staff in 1964, he testified before the Knesset Security and Foreign Affairs Committee that any future war would have to be won in 4 days. 4 days. It could not take substantially longer for economic reasons. The implications were that Israel should attack preemptively. Yet, to avoid alienating world opinion, the nation was left with no recourse but to, number one, allow the enemy to mobilize. 2, allow them to gather on Israel's borders. 3, proclaim to the world that this time the Jews would be liquidated. And then finally, then Israel could strike out at the enemy with an anticipatory counteroffensive at the last possible moment. All right, page 185. You have this map on page 185. It's a summary of the Middle East crisis, 14th through the 24th of May 1967. So you can read the information boxes found on the map that cover this, some of the statistics regarding what was going on and a little bit of the chronological events. All right, turn to the next page, page 186, and you have a summary of the Arab armies massing on Israel's borders. I wish I could give you a color rendition of the map like it is up on the screen. But you see on the west, the green arrows are the Egyptian army, 600 tanks fanning out through the Sinai Peninsula, Sharm el-Sheikh being taken at the south, and that red line across the Strait of Tiran blockaded. Then moving to the east and moving north now, the light blue arrows are the Saudi Arabian army. The red arrow above them is the Jordanian army advancing. The dark blue area above them is the Iraqi army. The purple arrow above them is the Syrian army, and then that light red army from Lebanon. But notice the orange arrow proceeding into the Mediterranean Sea. That's the UN. That's the UN. Running like rats, okay? That's the UN abandoning the area. Okay, so there's a summary of all that was going on. Now, at this point, it's not in your notes, but I want to share a biblical insight for you from Psalm 83. So let's go ahead and read Psalm 83. It's up on the screen, and I want you to notice some important points. Psalm 83, a song of Asaph. O God, do not remain quiet. Do not be silent, and O God, do not be still. For behold, your enemies make an uproar. Those who hate you. Who do they hate? Israel? They hate God. That's the ultimate person they're coming in conflict with. Those who hate you have exalted themselves. They make shrewd plans against your people and conspire together against your treasured ones. So this is what was happening. All the Arab governments, they were making shrewd plans. The Russians were involved too. Actually, they were kind of stupid. They have said, come, let us wipe them out as a nation. That was Nasser's comments. That the name of Israel be remembered no more, for they have conspired together with one mind against you. They have made what? A covenant, a military pact. Covenant. And now the participants in the covenant are named: the tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagarites, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, Philistia and all the inhabitants of Tyre. Assyria has also joined with them. They have become a help to the children of Lot. Selah. Think about it. Meditate on this. What is going on here? And now Asaph pleads with God. Deal with them as with Midian, as with Sisera and Yabin at the torrent of the Kishon, who were destroyed at Endor, who became as dung for the ground. Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeeb, and their princes like Zabach and Zalmunna, who said, let us possess for ourselves the pastures of God. Oh my God, make them like the whirling dust, like chaff before the wind, like fire that burns in the forest, like a flame that sets the mountains on fire. Pursue them with your tempest and terrify them with your storm. In other words, bring judgment upon them. Stop them. But Asaph doesn't ask for them to be stopped and Israel saved strictly for Israel's sake. Here he goes on to say, fill their faces with dishonor, that they may seek your name, O God. This is for the glory of God. And so that these nations would learn who they're dealing with. Remember Pharaoh? He wasn't dealing with a frog god or a river god or a sun god. I don't know the Lord. Who's the Lord? Said Pharaoh. He was dealing with the true and living God. And that's what's going on here too. Asaph wants these nations to know that they're dealing with the true and living God. Let them be ashamed and dismayed forever. Let them be humiliated and perish, that they may know that you alone, whose name is the Lord, are the Most High over all the earth. That's what he wants them to learn. All right, we've named some ancient peoples in the psalm, but guess what? Asaph would not know the modern names of these areas like we do. But you know, all those peoples that are named comprise the modern nations that surround Israel. For example, he named Edom in verse 6, the children of Lot in verse 8, Moab in verse 6, Ammon in verse 7. All those areas fall within the country of Jordan today. All those areas fall within the country of Jordan. The Ishmaelites lived in the Saudi Arabian peninsula, what we call Saudi Arabia today. The Hagarites, descendants of Hagar, lived in Egypt. Gebal and Tyre fall in the country of Lebanon today. That's the Phoenicians. Amalek were the Bedouins in the Sinai Peninsula. The Philistines were in the Gaza Strip. Philistia, verse 7. Syria and Iraq would represent Assyria in verse 8. Now, the point we need to make here is that at no time in the history of Israel have the surrounding nations covenanted together, all of them, in order to destroy Israel. At no time in Israel's history has this ever happened until now. Psalm 83 is being fulfilled at the present time before our eyes. This is the first time all the nations surrounding Israel have ever entered into a covenant to utterly destroy her. Do you think God will answer Asaph's prayer? This is a good time to pray that prayer back to the Lord. Pray Psalm 83 back to the Lord. I think it's being fulfilled today. All righty. I tell you what, I've got a quarter till, so let's pick it up at the bottom of page 187. So go ahead and take your break and listen for the shofar, and we'll be back in 15 minutes. Okay, let's pick it up on the bottom of page 187. Bottom of page 187 in your workbook. All right, June 1st. On June 1st, Foreign Minister Abba Eban informed Prime Minister Eshkol that no political purpose would be served in delaying military action. 7:10 p.m. June 5th. Major General Mordecai Hod, commander of Israel's Air Force, radioed the attack order from the operations room in the Defense Ministry at Tel Aviv. And here is you don't have this picture in your notebook, but here's a picture of Major General Mordecai Hod. He's the commander of the Israel Air Force, the IAF. Thereupon, the world's most skilled air arms was launched into action. Page 188. The Israeli pilots and ground crews were considered the equal of any in the world. Thanks to near-perfect intelligence, the Israeli command had pinpointed the location of virtually all Egyptian planes, all anti-aircraft batteries, and even the wooden dummy planes. It knew, too, when the Egyptian pilots flew their morning patrols and when they landed for their morning coffee break. All had been studied, prepared, and rehearsed innumerable times before D-Day. Now, the first Israeli planes took off in staggered intervals for Egypt's key air bases in the Sinai Peninsula, in the Suez Rectangle, and the Nile Valley. The two-engine Valtour light bombers were assigned the farthest target, Luxor on the Nile, almost twice the distance to Cairo. Now here's a drawing of the Valtour light bomber, twin-engine light bomber. They could fly the furthest, so they were assigned the furthest targets away. Here is a drawing of a Valtour in flight. Now, there were 19 Egyptian airfields, 19 individual Egyptian airfields to be attacked. One on Ras Banyas, off the map, south off the map here. An airfield at Luxor. An airfield at Gardaka. One at El Minya. Bnei Suef. 4 in the Cairo vicinity. 4 in the Delta. 1 at Al Arish, and 3 in the Sinai Peninsula, and 2 located near the Suez Canal.
Is this all simultaneously?
Well, yeah, we'll get there. Yes. So these are the 19 airfields. And so the Valtours were assigned the more distant airfields, longer range attack. So that's their plan of attack right here. The single-engine Mirage headed to the nearest fields at Al Arish and the others in the Sinai. So here is a Mirage, a Delta Wing fighter, French Delta Wing fighter that the Israelis obtained, and a drawing of a Mirage in flight. And again, they were assigned the targets that were closer in the Delta in Cairo.
Oh, was that plane in 67? Or is that a more recent photo of that plane?
That was a drawing of the plane, drawing of the plane in flight. The picture was one in an air museum. All right, so yeah, the Mirage I don't believe is in service any longer. So here is their plan of attack. Now, let's put it together. All were scheduled to arrive over their targets at the identical moment of 7:45 a.m. Israel time. All right, there they are. A tremendous logistical and planning program, right? 7:45. They all were to reach their targets simultaneously.
What day is that, Bob?
This is on June 5th. June 5th. 7:45 a.m. The reason they all had to reach their target simultaneously is so no warning would be given. You know, if somebody reached the target at 7 and the others reached at 7:45, the Egyptians would be on the attack, be warned. So they all had to reach their targets at the same identical time. Quite a job to figure all that out. The pilots were ordered first to destroy the Egyptian bombers and interceptors and then devastate the air bases. So taking off over the Mediterranean, the planes hooked back over Egypt at near ground level to avoid enemy radar. They had to do that too. They had to fly low so they wouldn't be spotted on radar. Reaching their 19, I believe that's a correction you need to make in your notebook. There are 19 separate targets. I changed Sakhar grouped them differently. I grouped them individually. Reaching their 19 separate targets at the appointed time, the Israelis climbed high and then dived to 200 feet and proceeded to attack the Tupolovs and the MiGs. Those are the Russian aircraft that the Russians had supplied to Egypt. The Egyptian fighters were taxiing to a halt after returning from their morning patrol, getting ready for their coffee break. The anti-aircraft crews were also caught away from their positions. The Israelis accordingly made 4 passes over their targets, consuming their allotted 7 minutes to destroy the enemy planes and then rocket bomb the Egyptian airfields. 10 minutes after the first attack wave came the second, and 10 minutes after that, the third. So it wasn't just one attack at 7:45. It was one coordinated attack at 7:45, 7:55, and 8:05. Amazing. Yes, question?
Would that be the same aircraft?
No, these would be waves of... The aircrafts that attacked first would have to head home for refueling and rearming. Yeah. As the Israelis streaked for home, they managed to evade a number of surface-to-air missiles that climbed out after them. In 170 minutes, this is from the start when they took off to the end, in 170 minutes, Israel's pilots had smashed Egypt's best-equipped air bases and turned 300 of Nasser's 340 combat planes into flaming wrecks. And there you have a picture. The picture's up on the screen. 3 of the MiGs, 3 of the destroyed MiGs turned to ashes. Just piles of ash there. Another 20 Egyptian planes were shot down in the air. So we have 300 in the ground and 20 in the air out of 340, so there's only 20 planes remaining. 20 planes survived the attack. When the returning Israeli jets touched down and their pilots debriefed, the news of their success was received with disbelief and skepticism. General Hode admitted later, quote, "In my wildest dreams, I would never have thought this kind of record possible. I reckoned on at least half a day to complete the job, not 2 hours. Maybe even a whole day, maybe a night and a day." He was just as amazed as anyone else. Page 189. The Egyptian Air Force, the largest in the Middle East, was in ruins. And now the Israelis were free from the very outset to concentrate on the Egyptian ground armies. So indeed, throughout the next few days, the Air Force roamed at will over Sinai, destroying entire convoys of armor and vehicles fleeing for the canal. Now at 8:15 on June 5th, the ground forces attacked. So this is only a half hour after the air attack. The ground forces were on the move. Now on your map, you can see the line of attack of the Israeli brigades. This is on page 189. This is the map. And the Six-Day War lines of attack are laid out there. The initial lines of attack are here along the Egyptian border. You can see the Israeli troops moving into Gaza, and then the northern border area, and then to the south there's an incursion as well. Then as the war progressed, the Israelis followed this path across the Sinai Peninsula and moved all the way to the Suez Canal. So your map summarizes the movement of the Israelis across the Sinai Peninsula. The Six-Day War. All right. At the end of the second day of battle, I should say, after 35 hours of uninterrupted war, the first and most difficult phase of the Israeli operational plan had been completed. Egyptian fortifications had been penetrated and bypassed. Sinai was open wide before Israeli armor, and the roads to the west and south were clear. Page 190. Throughout the first day of the Sinai offensive, the Israeli government refrained. They didn't say anything. They refrained from issuing announcements on the magnitude of their victories. The only military communiques that went out over the airwaves were broadcast from Cairo. And during the first 24 hours, these releases spoke of unprecedented Egyptian breakthroughs, of Israel's army and air force destroyed, of Egyptian mechanized columns driving on Tel Aviv. Well, there was a reason for that. They knew that the news was accepted unquestionably everywhere in the Arab world. That's what the Arab world wanted and expected. Of course, that's what would happen. And it influenced the precipitous decisions of Syria, Jordan, and Iraq to enter the fighting. When the hostilities began on June 5th, the Syrians, at the last minute, adopted a wait-and-see attitude. and preferred simply to shell the Galilee town of Rosh Pinah and its neighboring border settlements. Israeli artillery kept up a vigorous reply to the Syrian barrage. By late afternoon on June 5th, the Israeli Air Force had all but eradicated the Syrian air arm, and it was apparent to Damascus that it had been misinformed as to the extent of the Egyptian victories. Deprived by then of the opportunity to embark on a major offensive, the Syrian regime made its second mistake in continuing hostilities on a local scale. And we'll talk about more of that when we get to the Syrian front. On June 6, the Syrian infantry and armored company launched 2 attacks on Tel Dan and one on Kibbutz Sha'ar Yashuv. They were repelled by Israeli tank and air units. The Syrians would pay bitterly for this miscalculation. Again, like I said, we will talk in detail about the Syrian front in a little bit. The Jordanian blunder was even more catastrophic. King Hussein received an urgent message from Prime Minister Eshkol appealing to Hussein to refrain from entering the war. The Israeli leader promised that his own government would not initiate his hostilities on the Eastern Front. But shooting from the Jordanian positions at the southern end of Jerusalem broke out at mid-morning on June 5th. The Jordanians, it was hoped, were interested simply in making a gesture to remain in Nasser's good graces. Yeah, we fired, we entered the battle, we shot at him. Too bad you lost. To ensure that they entertained no serious ambitions, the Israeli Air Force commenced bombing runs on the Amman and the Mafraq airfields at 12:30 p.m., liquidating the entire Jordanian fighter fleet. This is the 3rd Air Force that's been smashed. By 1 p.m., either by prearrangement or in a counter-retaliatory spasm, Arab Legion forces crossed the Jerusalem armistice lines and occupied UN headquarters on the Hill of Evil Council. From the larger military viewpoint, the siege of the Hill of Evil Council was Hussein's greatest error. He failed to detect the power of Israeli air squadrons over Amman when Egypt was boasting that virtually all of Israel's planes had been destroyed. None of Nasser's commanders gave him the actual facts. It was only at 4 p.m. that the headquarters officer arrived with straight information. I have come to tell you that we no longer have an air force. A little late. On June 6, the Egyptian High Command ordered its troops to fall back to the second line of defense in the Sinai. Israel then launched a coordinated attack at dawn on June 7th. In the ensuing armored battles in flat terrain, the highly skilled Israeli tankers all but annihilated their opponents. Page 191. In the end, more than 800 Egyptian tanks were knocked out or captured. As far as I remember, that is the largest tank battle ever won by any nation in war. At the same time, another conquest proved surprisingly easy. On June 7th, Sharm el-Sheikh, the Egyptian coastal fortress overlooking the Strait of Tiran, fell without resistance. The Egyptians fled even before Israeli paratroops could be dropped or the first amphibious units disembarked from their LSTs. Thus, the elements of the battalions that had landed at Sharm el-Sheikh subsequently were flown to Al-Tur, where they continued northward along the shore of the Gulf of Suez. And on June 8th, they linked up with Israeli units coming down the Gulf coast from Ras Sadur. So on your map, we're talking about this area right down here. At the bottom of the Sinai Peninsula is Sharm el-Sheikh. It falls without a fight, and so the army units are allowed free to move up the coastline of the Sinai Peninsula, excuse me, and link up with units coming down from the north.
How many men were actually killed?
Excuse me?
How many men were killed in all?
We'll cover that statistic in a moment, okay? You're always ahead of me. We'll get there. So now the entire Sinai, as you can see from the map, is ringed by Israeli forces. Only one strip of unguarded territory remained, and that was the canal itself, the Suez Canal. With the greater part of the Egyptian army smashed in the desert behind them, the Israelis pressed on to the canal. On June 8th, Israeli troops had reached Alcantara and destroyed the remaining Egyptian armor there. Now the victory was a staggering one. 7 Egyptian divisions, totaling 100,000 men, had been crushed in less than 4 days. At 1 p.m. on June 8th, Fedorenko of the Soviet Union introduced a ceasefire resolution at the UN. The resolution was passed unanimously. Israeli UN Ambassador Abba Eban declared that Israel would abide by its terms provided the Arab states indicated agreement. Nasser accepted the resolution, and so the war on the Egyptian front was all but over. Now, let's move to the Jordanian front. Jerusalem reunited. Now, you can get more details on this battle in the book written by Lieutenant General Mordecai Gur, The Battle for Jerusalem. It's available on Amazon.com. I found it a fascinating account many years ago when I bought it. I've scanned in the cover of my copy, and you can notice that when I bought it, it was only $2.50. Yes. Today, it's probably $15. Anyway, The Battle for Jerusalem, Lieutenant General Mordecai Gur, and anyone wants to pick it up, here's the portrait of Lieutenant General Mordecai Gur, the head of the paratroop division that fought for the reunification of Jerusalem. Alrighty. Now, the Jordanian troops occupied Government House on the afternoon of June 5th and proceeded to shell the small Israeli detachment on Mount Scopus. We talked about that earlier. So here's what happened. Here is a map of the area. The blue on the left is Israel, Western Jerusalem. The brown on the right is Jordan. Remember, this is the country of Jordan at this time. There's no Palestinian entity. There's no Palestinian state. Jordan annexed that territory in 1950. This is the country of Jordan. You can see in the upper right an Israel demilitarized zone where Hadassah Hospital is located and Hebrew University is located on Mount Scopus. Just to the south of that is a Jordan demilitarized zone where the Augusta Victoria Church is located. So the first step in the battle for Jerusalem is the Jordanians take Government House. Now again, here is the old city. And Government House is here on the slopes of the Hill of Evil Council, southern slopes of the Hill of Evil Council. So the Jordanians take Government House. There it is. Then, instead of just occupying that territory in no man's land, they begin to shell Mount Scopus. So they get out their mortars and they start lobbing shells here into the demilitarized zone where Hadassah Hospital, etc. is located. So that's the first step. At this point, with Diane's approval, Rabin issued orders to General Narkis: retake Government House, link up with Scopus, protect the Jerusalem high ground at any means. So a company of troops were sent about ascending the Hill of Evil Council, and by mid-afternoon the operation was completed with the loss of 8 dead. So here's our map, although we're looking at a little to the south. The Hill of Evil Council is this area, the summit of the hill apparently about in this area. So we have Israeli troops taking the Hill of Evil Council, taking the Government House UN headquarters, and securing this area, this high ground, securing all that area. They did lose 8 soldiers, however. Simultaneously, a paratroop brigade under the command of Colonel Mordecai Gur was reassigned from its intended Sinai destination and transported by bus from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Gur's instructions were to attack Jordanian fortifications on the perimeter of the Arab city and then move against the legionnaires atop the heights near Scopus, near Mount Scopus. At 7:45 p.m., searchlights went on atop the Histadrut building and focused their beams on Jordanian artillery and machine gun positions. The Israelis then shelled the illuminated targets. Page 192. And the spotlights apparently blinded the Jordanians at the same time. At the same moment, the Jerusalem Brigade's ancient Sherman tanks rolled out of their camouflage shed and were sent moving toward the Jordanian bunkers. The attack began at 2:20 a.m. on June 6th. The first prong of the attack was Ammunition Hill. The legionnaires fought heroically, and positions had to be stormed trench by trench in fierce and costly battle. And here's our map again. This Ammunition Hill is located in approximately this area here. And so we have the paratroopers crossing no man's land and attacking the Jordanians in this particular area, in that general area there.
Bob,
Yes?
where's Mount Pisgah on that map?
I don't think it's on this map. I'm not sure where that's located.
That was in western Jordan.
I'd have to look that up. Now here's a picture probably taken in the morning as the battle began in the evening, the night, of the battle for Ammunition Hill. You can see the Israeli helmets in the trenches. This was a very, very costly battle because this was trench warfare, trench to trench, man to man. Here is Ammunition Hill today. The Jordanian trenches have been left in position as a war memorial. And you can just imagine how brutal the fighting was here, because you'd have Jordanians entrenched in these little roundabouts. You had to throw in grenades. You had to, well, anyway, read it in General Mordecai Gore's book. Just a horrendous battle. Just a horrendous battle. Trench by trench, man by man. The second prong of the attack was launched from the Mea Sharim quarter directly against the Mandelbaum Gate. Now here's our map again. And again, here's the old city. We've gone in a little closer now. Here's the old city. Here's the Mea Sharim area of Jerusalem, outside the old city. Now this arrow points to the Mandelbaum Gate. That's where no man's land touches Israel. That's where Jordan touches Israel, the Mandelbaum Gate. This is the entrance from Israel into Jordan. And this is the way it looked when it was in operation. It is not in operation, of course, anymore. It doesn't exist anymore. But this is the way it looked, this entranceway into Jordan. It was named after the Mandelbaum House, which is located in that general vicinity. I don't believe that exists anymore either. So this was a very heavily fortified area and, of course, a strategic point. So we have the paratroopers with their second prong of the attack going directly against the Mandelbaum Gate. Once more, fighting was intense, ranging from street to street and house to house. It wasn't trench warfare this time. With support of tanks, the paratroopers completed the action by dawn. So again, here's our map. We have the paratroopers attacking the Mandelbaum Gate. They move forward and they secure this area here. So Ammunition Hill has been secured, and then the area close to the Mount Scopus has been secured as well. Rabin then ordered his general to launch a coordinated pincer movement throughout the West Bank. The operation was carried out with almost mathematical precision. By late morning on June 7th, ravaged by aerial strafing and bombing, Jordan's 25th Infantry and 40th Armored Brigades collapsed as fighting units, and all the major cities of the West Bank were now in Israel's hands. And this map summarizes that pincer movement. You can see the arrows showing how the Israelis advanced. I've highlighted them with the red arrow here. And so by the time this pincer movement was finished, all the major cities of the West Bank now lay in the hands of the Israelis. And as you can see from the arrows, Israeli armor reached down to the Jordan River. At 8:30 a.m. on June 7th, Gur ordered an infantry attack against the final remaining Jordanian high point overlooking Jerusalem. It was the Augusta Victoria Church, and it fell easily. So here's no man's land, and Israel on the left and Jordan on the right. And so now the paratroopers go into the Jordan area, the Jordan demilitarized zone, where Augusta Victoria Church is located, and that area is now secured. Yes?
How many miles are we talking about?
Not many. I don't know if I have a scale there, but it's a couple of miles. It's not much. It's not much at all.
That's interesting that the Jordanians were hiding out in the demilitarized zone.
Well, yeah, it had to be taken, but it fell without much of a battle. Okay. Immediately afterward, the paratroops launched a tank and infantry assault against the Lion's Gate, one of the principal entrances to the old city. So here's our map. You can see the Jordanian demilitarized zone that, as Marion has said, was not so demilitarized. Down the road they go into the Kidron Valley up to the Lion's Gate of the old city. And here again, there's the Lion's Gate, one of the key gates to the old city. Here's the way it looks today. It looked that way in 1967 as well. Not much cover. If you were on the ramparts above the gate, you could wipe out people coming up the road. Now the Lion's Gate is called the Lion's Gate because of 4 lions that are carved into the gate itself, into the wall, or lion-like beasts. Here's a close-up of 2 of them, and then a close-up of one of them, and you can see it's all pockmarked with bullet holes. That gate has received a lot of bullets.
Who made that gate? Was it the Ottoman Empire?
Yeah, it would be. Yes, this would be probably Suleiman the Magnificent, Arab work there. Okay. Now, rolling up the narrow Via Dolorosa, the column made directly for the ancient Temple Mount. So here we have the Lion's Gate, through the Lion's Gate, up the Via Dolorosa, and then a hard left turn and into the Temple Mount itself. Now, the Mosque of Omar is also known as the Dome of the Rock today. Now, here's a drawing of the area, so you can get a little kind of a picture of the idea. Up the Via Dolorosa, there's at least 3 entrances into the Temple Mount from the Via Dolorosa, and so the troops came in and conquered the Temple Mount. Now here is a picture of a military photographer following the troops as they entered the Temple Mount. That's the Dome of the Rock in the background. If you've been with me to Israel, you've walked in this area, and so you're familiar with it. This was 1967. The paratroopers then dashed for the Western Wall to clear it of snipers. And here is a picture of the Israeli soldiers as they reach the Western Wall. And this is the prayer alleyway. Remember the prayer alleyway? We showed it to you earlier. That's all it was in 1967. There's the prayer alleyway where Jewish people were allowed to pray for 2,000 years. And this is the very, very famous picture taken by David Rubinger of the Israeli soldiers at the Western Wall. They are identified: Zion Karasenti, Yitzhak Yifat, and Chaim Oshri. They're the 3 paratroopers in the foreground. And
That picture of the map or the recent one?
yes, that's the next picture. Here's a picture I found of the recent picture taken in 2014. There are the 3 men striking the same pose in pretty much the same location. So these men, this picture was taken in 2014, so they're still alive and healthy.
Bob, could we have a picture of that?
I could run the slide for you. Yeah, I can. Okay, I can reproduce the slide for you. Okay, I'll give it. You guys want this picture? Okay, all right. I'll reproduce this slide for you all. Let me write it down, unless I forget.
And the one that describes the names of each of the soldiers.
All right.
That's important.
Okay. Western Wall slides. Okay. We'll do that. Okay. So it's kind of fun to run across this picture and see them years later.
Do you know who organized the new photos?
No, I don't. No. The firing had not yet stopped around the Western Wall before Rabbi Shlomo Goren, chief chaplain of the Israeli army, rushed to the holy site to loose a triumphant blast on the shofar. And here we have Shlomo Goren blowing his shofar at the Western Wall, June 1967. Again, a very well-known photograph. Dayan, Rabin, and Eshkol soon followed, dazed and awestruck by the recovery. And here is Generals Eshkol on the left, Dayan in the middle, and Yitzhak Rabin, recovered from his nicotine poisoning, on the right. Again, quite amazed at what had happened. And here's a picture of just Israeli soldiers at the Dome of the Rock. Temple Mount, in Israel's hands.
Yeah, it used to be, right?
It used to be, yes. And touching the flagstones of the ancient wall, even hardened veterans wept. Now, Hussein had paid dearly for his gamble. He had lost over 15,000 troops in dead, wounded, and missing, as well as the entire Air Force and half of his armor. Essentially, he had been stripped of half of his kingdom, its richest agricultural lands, and the tourist revenues from East Jerusalem and Bethlehem accounted for 40% of the nation's income. That's why he wanted that territory. But he made the Israelis pay as well. The truth is, we paid a heavier price in Jerusalem than we did in Sinai. 1,756 casualties in Jerusalem, 1,075 casualties in the Sinai. No less than 25% of Israel's losses on the Jordanian front were taken in the Battle of Jerusalem, specifically the Old City. But few Israelis begrudged the cost. All right, we will pick it up. You have a map, you have this map, the capture of Jerusalem, and this map will summarize what I showed you on the slides. So we'll pick it up next week with the conquest of the Golan Heights, the Syrian front, on page 194. We'll see what happens with Syria. So let me go ahead and pray, and I'll turn you guys loose, and we'll see you next week. Father, again, thank you for your work sustaining and protecting the modern nation of Israel. Thank you, Lord, for your promises can always be relied upon. Help us always to remember that as you protect your beloved ones, you protect us. And so help us to remember that as we go through the trials and tribulations of life in this world. And we do lift up Israel today. We pray for the peace of Jerusalem as the latest operation is going on in the Gaza Strip. Give them wisdom each step of the way, Lord, and preserve your people. We ask this in Yeshua's name. Amen. All righty, we'll see you next week.